Okay. Okay, so I guess like my first like thing is, can you please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your journey with ADHD?
So absolutely. Here, give me just a second. So I want to make sure that there we go. So I am Yakini Pierce, and my ADHD journey actually started with my children. So years ago when they were, I would say probably it actually started with my daughter. When she hit about 2 years old, I saw some differences. I always say that I don't like to compare myself or compare my children with other children, but mine were just really, if they got angry, it was just like an event, right? If they were happy, it was an event. Like it just didn't matter. It was just extra. And and especially when they got angry, I didn't understand why. So when my daughter turned 4 years old, I went to a child therapist, and she says, you should get her checked to see if she has ADHD or autism. And so I went into the psychologist. That particular psychologist said, he wasn't comfortable diagnosing her that young.
Yeah.
Either way, but he says, so wait till she gets a little bit older. Well, ironically, simultaneously, my son, because they're 2 years apart, my son started to get into a lot of trouble. And I forgot to mention that both of my kids have been kicked out of like daycares, and I've got phone calls every single day. I mean, it was just like an insane time. And so by the time my son turned 5, when he turned 5 and started kindergarten, I had already mentally prepared. First of all, I moved school districts because I just felt that the school district that they were in a Montessori school, and they just really couldn't give them the support. It's not like they didn't want to; they just didn't have the programs. So I moved them, and I purposely kept documentation of my children and of the past situation, so then that way I could ask for something, right? Yeah. Well, with my son, since my daughter was like, for some reason, like when she hit first grade, everything external, like all of her anger, she would like kick things and knock things over. Everything was internal. So at that time, we didn't know there was still some things going on with her. And because my son basically took the floor and, got in trouble, et cetera, et cetera. So long story short, he was able to get an IEP and get that support. But, and then later, my daughter was diagnosed last year at 11 years old, something like that. She was diagnosed last year with inattentive, and my son was diagnosed with the hyperactivity impulsive type. But this is a long way to my, my journey. So it was so weird, except for the external expression. Maybe at home I would get upset, but they were just like, woo. Except for that, I saw myself in them. Like it just clicked to me. I said, oh my gosh, I used to do this that my son does, or I used to do this that my daughter does. And I still do these things that my children do, right? And I said, because I would always joke, I bet it came from my side. I said it probably didn't come from their dad's side, because you know how you want to blame the other person. And I'm like, not this time. I think it came from my side. So I went ahead and got diagnosed, and I didn't get a specific diagnosis, but I was diagnosed with the comorbidity of anxiety, depression, which a lot of people go through anyway, especially when they're dealing with ADHD. And so, so for me, I always tell people it's like validation, right? Yeah. It's, everybody goes through an experience. Some people are frustrated. Some people are in tears because either they don't want the diagnosis or finally they are able to connect to it. I was just thrilled. I was just happy that all the things that I've done throughout my life, there was a reason why I did it, right? So it was just a huge thing for me. So that's the long summary.
When you were diagnosed, did you kind of have like a flashback to your childhood of like, oh my gosh, this is why I was like this, or this is why I did this when I was a child?
Yeah, I actually had the flashbacks while my children were going through their journey. Like while I was trying to figure out what was going on with them, that's when I started to have the flashbacks. And that's when I said, gosh, they do this, they're struggling with this, and I struggled with this when I was in school. And that's part of ADHD. So there was for example, I struggled with friendships, and I struggled with perfectionism, and I struggled with trying so hard that when you get overwhelmed with so much information that you don't want to do anything because you don't know where to start. So all these different things that, like writing, I made mistakes all the time. It was really interesting. I was in college. I think it was my first year in college, and we had to take English, but even though today they call it literacy, but so we had to take English, and we did a lot of writing. And she used to say how engineers never could write, right? And I'm like, I cannot write anything. I make mistakes. But that's also, I mean, people told me they go through similar things, right? So all of these things was just like an aha moment. So yeah, a lot of flashbacks.
So like, what do you think about when like you hear like society's perception of ADHD, which is, oh, it's just a little boy who can't sit still? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes deeper than that. It's not just society's perception of it's a little boy that can't sit still. A lot of what is in and I've learned this over the last year, is that a lot is what is in the DSM is based on, at least in the US, it's based on white little boys, right? Mm-hmm. So it does not include girls. It does not include a lot of people with ethnicity. So culturally, it is really based on this one group. So yes, when a person gets excited, or when a little boy gets excited, they would say, okay, maybe technically a teacher can't just directly say your child has ADHD, go get them checked out, right? But they would just hint, there's some struggles, you may want to get this checked out. Where in parallel, another little boy would say, they may get in trouble, but they are considered like a bad child, or, et cetera, et cetera. But then you have the girls on top of that, where if it's internalized, so if it's externalized, like my daughter, if she had continued her path, she probably would have been diagnosed a lot earlier, right? Mm-hmm. But because it went internal, and all of her emotions were internal, and when she got upset, she did not share those things, but she would daydream, right? Her mind was processing literally 5,000 miles a minute. She would walk in circles, and just literally, she walks in, even today, she just walks in circles, and she's just thinking. And I'm always like, so what are you thinking about, right? And she'll tell me exactly what she's thinking about. So there was so ironically, I just talked to so she's in 7th grade now. She was diagnosed last year. She's in 7th grade now. And I just talked to the counselor about paying attention to her, because when she gets stressed out, it is just like a huge weight on her shoulders. Mm-hmm. So we talked about some of the things that were tied to ADHD that may help relieve some of those stresses. And so they're going to allow her to do certain things. But if I hadn't said anything, she wouldn't have been seen, right? Because she is overall a sweet person. She is like the mom. She takes really good care of, everybody in class. And she does well academically. She got almost all A's, last year. So she would have been totally missed. But that's why, for me, I had to make sure, academically, I was on top of making sure she got the assistance and the accommodations she needs. So the bottom line is, why do girls get missed? They tend to, we tend to work harder, because even though we don't know what's going on with our brain, we want to compensate for that, right? We work so much harder, and We want to get that grade. You know, we're seeing everybody else get these grades. Why am I not getting those grades? And so a lot of us do well. Now, you do have some sides where they're like, this is just so hard, and they give up, especially when you get to college. When you get to college and you don't have a support system and you're on your own, it's a whole nother level, right?
Yeah.
And if they were missed in grade school, they're definitely going to be missed in college. They're just going to be seen as students who couldn't make it, right? So, so yeah, so the bottom line is, because, and it's not just, so it's mostly girls, but if boys have that same inattentive type, you know, symptoms, then
Yeah.
they also will be missed. So.
To kind of like bounce off the like last question, has ADHD like kind of affected your kids or your mental health or physical health?
So the I would say the biggest thing is learning how to handle conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in college, I remember an incident, and I share this with everyone. When I was in college, actually throughout high school, I used to put a lot of pressure on myself because I just didn't understand why I was not getting the grades, like I said, that other people were getting. I wanted to be getting these top grades, and they were not happening. And when I went to college, I put so much pressure on myself that I ended up getting sick. I got sick. My hair started to thin. Like, it was just falling out. I mean, it was really, really bad. And and even when I started to work in, so I graduated from college, I started to work. I would say cycling, it would happen to me every so often when I would work, when the stress, again, it was just like I was just absorbing everything. And I would either get headaches, I had bad migraines. I mean, there was times like one of my jobs, it was so bad that I had to have them turn off most of my lights because it was just so bad. So yes, a lot of it because of the all of there was a combination of things that were happening to me that now I understand were tied to ADHD. So, like, for example, um, writing reports, right? And I may have a mistake in the report. And then my boss gets mad that I have a mistake in the report. And then it was just it was a mistake. And I didn't mean to have that mistake, but you sent it to everybody. So then you start getting pressure, and then you think everybody's mad at you. And then you think, then you think you're going to get fired. And then it's just, it's like, you just got to go down this mountain, and it's like, or down this hill. And it's like, it's not even that serious, just all the pressure and stress. Like I said, building relationships. I literally have a lot of associates and a lot of friends because it was always hard for me to build relationships with the same people. Like, after so long, sometimes I would just go, right? And I mean, when I say go, I would just disappear. They're like, okay, where have you been? I just disappeared because I was so afraid to deal with the conflicts in a relationship. I was afraid that I would say something, like, that's another part where, like, things would just come out of my mouth and I would make people upset. And I'm like, don't be mad. And I always tell people, do not ask me a question that you don't want the truth, right? Because I will give you the honest truth. So yeah, so I truly believe in, health wise, you having a really strong community, a community that you can that can keep you balanced, and you guys can bounce, issues off of each other, and that there's love out there because you have this community. And for a while, I was going in and out of that. Now, as a person, I'm much older now, so I don't have that same need. And which is interesting. When I desired it, it was hard for me. But now that I don't focus on it, I don't focus on my community, and I now am building really good, strong relationships. I didn't focus on my grades. when I got my MBA and I got a 4.0, right? Because I was not putting stress on myself. I just allowed things to flow. I just enjoyed what I learned. And all of those things, like I said, all of those things were tied to different aspects of ADHD. And yes, health wise, it was a very big issue for me. Now that I understand, even though I kind of set my mind to focus on my kids, I think that helped too, because I was no longer focusing on myself. I wanted to figure out how I could help them. So I think that also helped. But overall, my health has gotten just, it's just fine now because I just don't stress out as much. So yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. And as far as my kids, yes, the same thing would happen to my kids. My son, I mean, he would get tense. He never really got sick because of the stress, but if he did anything wrong, he would go through I call it the self-negative effect, where he would just talk badly about himself, and he would just, be angry and mad and just say, like, I'm stupid and why would I do such a thing? He would just really it was like damaging his ego because he was just so mad. And again, same thing. He was mad. No, he was frustrated because he made somebody else mad, right?
yeah.
He made his teacher upset or he made a friend upset. And so those type of things hit him really hard. My daughter, she stresses out where I mean, she is like in tears, and she's the type of person where she has to get it off her chest and talk it through, or it's just going to live inside of her. So over time, I truly believe these things would become health issues if I didn't help them figure out how to deal with those emotions now, like, getting a therapist and setting up, them with people that they can work with at their schools. And, we have a big brothers, big sisters program. So they each have a big, so little different things where, again, they have a community around them to help them, move through life. So, yeah.
Yeah. I had a question in my head and it just like left. It was like bye. I'm like
Never fails, right?
speaking of which, like how, like if you could improve the education system in some way to help people who have ADHD or to help people who are neurodivergent, what would you do?
So, and honestly, I had an interesting conversation with a few teachers, and I thought these type of things would be a great idea. Is teach the kids as if they're all having some type of neurodivergent issue, right? So, in other words, it's not like the ADHD kids are behind. My daughter's considered gifted. Like I said, she did extremely well last year. My son overall does very well in school. So it's not like if you give them special things, it's going to slow them down. It actually keeps them up. And it also puts them ahead of the other students in certain ways, right? So, like, for example, emotionally, my son is able to talk through a problem with another child. When I was at the Montessori school, and I was sat on the board for the Montessori school for the year, what was really focused on was conflict management, right, between children, because they believe that the earlier that you do this, the more you can build those skills as you go on, right? So you really need and so the earlier that you can deal with conflict and manage conflict and learn how to work a situation out with somebody that you're upset with, then hopefully, you will grow into adult being able to be proficient at it. And so so it was really interesting. So when I came to the new school district, and don't get me wrong, they're absolutely wonderful, and I love this school district. But one of the things that they automatically wanted to do when my son was having a conflict with another child is that they wanted to separate them, right? Because they just wanted them to avoid. And I said, no, I want them to work it out. I want them to talk through what they're feeling, how they're feeling, and I want them to just work it out, right?
Yeah.
So the principal at the time, she says, I don't think it's going to work. And I'm like, why don't you think it's going to work? It works for this school. So why won't it work for this? So his specialist, because he's on the IEP, he has a interventionist. And so she was willing, she volunteered to work with the kids. And she literally did some of the things that I mentioned. And then she also added her own twist to it. And these kids were like at each other's throat, I would say from like December until March.
Oh.
I mean, literally, it was a long time. And by time they were done, their relationship got so good that the other kid invited my son to his birthday party, right?
Oh, that's nice.
It was like, that's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
And so really learning how to deal with conflict and being able to talk things through emotionally is huge. So, so your question is that what would you bring? Number one, I would bring. So, for example, my kid gets to take breaks, right? He gets to walk around. So why can't all the kids take breaks? Like,
Yeah.
have like a 5-minute break where they walk around or they jump or whatever, and then they sit back down, right? Or, my son gets to, he doesn't have to sit on the floor with everyone else in the circle. And sometimes he gets to lay. Well, why can't all the other kids do that, right? They can all lay in the circle and just, and just listen to the teacher. So the key is why couldn't they just implement some things for all the children so all the children can benefit? Conflict resolution, some of the breaks, some methods of the way that he gets taught could benefit the other children. So just putting it as part of the class. And like I said, it isn't things that are going to keep them behind. It actually, like breaks, for example, that's, having a moment and then being able to go back to your work, it just resets you. So the bottom line is that if they could just implement some things, in the classroom, I think that would be really powerful.
Yeah. I think having two kids really gives you the like
It does.
like is there any tips that you would give people with ADHD to like help them out in everyday life? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, obviously, just really depends on the stage you are in. So if you're at the beginning stage, no matter what age you are, I would just say learn as much as you can about ADHD. Learn, what are some of those struggles, and learn what are some of those good things about ADHD. Then learn how it connects with you. What are your struggles and what are some of those things? Because if you learn about all the struggles that people have and you learn about, some of those, some people call it superpowers, some people call it strengths. But if you learn about the different types of strength that is out there that is related to ADHD, you can apply those things to what you're doing. So, so for example, you may be, so some people will say being talkative is okay. So if you are in class and you're talking a lot, you tend to get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
But my daughter can debate, right? So her strength is debating. She also is a leader, and her strength is, she says the right things and she can bring, people together, right? So being able to figure out what are some of those things. And I also talk about contradictions a lot, right? So you have the times when you got to learn when not to be so talkative, but then you have the times when you need to be. So learning the balance and learning how it works for you, I think it's powerful. So if you have the strength, you figure out what can you do to make that strength even better. And if you're struggling with this, what are some of those things that you can put in place to help you not talk so much? So for example, my daughter may have a fidget. When she knows she's about to say something, she may squeeze it, right? Like, okay, I'm not going to say it, or she, I forgot what was the other technique we talked about, but when she knows she is about to blurt or interrupts somebody, she will do a certain thing to remind her, let me not talk.
Yeah.
But in the same breath, when it's time, oh, she talks. She is, like they in literacy, they have to read the book. Well, they read chapters at a time, and they all have to give their opinion about what's going on in the chapter. She is right with them. She talks about what's going on, and she talks about it deeply. And I mean, the teachers have always complimented her in terms of how she is able to really share information. So that's her strength, right? So the tip is understand what your strengths are, understand what you need to learn to manage, and figure out how to manage those certain things. And you have to figure out what works for you. For example, I forget appointments all day long. Like, I am horrible at appointments. I can tell you that up front. So I have my appointment. So like your appointment, for example, right? So I have my appointment in my calendar. I have my, in my work calendar, because that's what I see all day. Then I have a duplicate in my personal calendar. And then I set an alarm. Sometimes the day before, I'm like, okay, set an alarm for 4:45 p.m., right? So I don't miss the appointment. I know I miss appointments. So I have to put things in place to make sure. Now, everybody else, an alarm may not work for them. They may turn off that alarm and then continue to do whatever they're doing. For me, I get up right away, right? But then again, it's my third, my third reminder. So being able to put things in place that work for you is going to be key. And that's really the bottom line, is really understanding ADHD, understanding how it connects with you specifically, understanding your strengths, understanding those things you need to work on, highlight and feed those strengths. And then for the things that you need to manage, figure out what techniques you need to put in place that's going to help you specifically.
Like the question I was going to ask actually earlier, because I finally remembered it. And it kind of directly is like from like the last question as well, as has ADHD in any way helped you in your life? Like by being diagnosed with it, has it like helped you in any way?
I would say the only thing it really helped me do, like I said, is the validation. It eased my mind quite a bit. Because people don't realize when you're going through certain things in life, how much it just mentally, emotionally, spiritually affects you. When you don't feel like you're doing the right things or making the right decisions, or you don't understand why you don't get something, you don't understand why people are always mad at you for something that you say. So there's just all these different things that happen. And now I finally can put a name to it. I finally can put a name to why I was so disorganized, why my place was an absolute mess. My car was a mess. I mean, like, I was just like not a dirty person, just a messy person. Like, clothes were everywhere. And, and I didn't care who walked in. I'm just like, whatever. People just moved the clothes off. I would have clothes in my car. I would have clothes all over my apartment. And I just didn't understand why. Why can't I just pick things up, right? Now I'm the opposite. I mean, I'm not perfectly neat, but because I have children, now it's the overwhelming feeling. Like, I can't have too much stuff, because I'm already dealing with the energy of my children. I'm dealing with the energy of myself. And so I can't have it messy, because now it's too overwhelming if I see stuff everywhere, because I need to clean it up, right? So
Yeah.
I try to keep it, I would say, semi-neat. And so, so it's just, so the bottom line is just being able to connect to just all of those things I think about. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on Clubhouse. Have you ever been on Clubhouse?
Yeah, I've been in Clubhouse.
So I used to listen to, wait a minute, did we see each other in Clubhouse?
I don't think so.
Okay. So so when I would listen to some of those rooms and listen to people talk, I mean, even though I didn't have tears in my eyes, it just felt like, wow, this is a thing. And wow, there's a reason why I was doing that. And other people are doing those same things. It's like, I think Clubhouse really put me into a centered place because I could hear the emotions of other people and I can listen to their stories, and they were similar to mine. And bottom line is, for me, it put me on the right emotional track. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing. I have I had already been putting things in place. One of the things I always tell people is that I was very blessed because I had the parents that I had. So my parents always gave me strategies to put in place to help me grow, bottom line, right? And even though we didn't know some of the things that I was doing was tied to ADHD, we didn't talk about ADHD, even in the school systems back then. And so throughout my life, I was growing and I was doing well overall because my parents always taught me certain ways to do things, right? And I carried some of those techniques throughout my whole life. But it didn't stop me from doing a lot of the things, again, that were tied to ADHD. And so, like I said, once I knew that, that was just a huge, huge thing for me. So.
Okay, so this is like the last question of the interview. And it's basically like the center of my project is about women, and it's about girls who do get underdiagnosed. And you talked about it a little bit earlier, but like, why do you think is like the central reason that girls do get underdiagnosed, and how do you think we can prevent that in the future?
So the bottom line is, the reason why girls tend to get missed is because they do not show the outwardly signs. And again, like we said earlier, ADHD is considered the disruptive diagnosis, which are tied to little boys, right? So when girls are dealing with things internally, or when they're drifting off, or when they're looking out the window, or when they missed what the teacher says, they just write that. It's like, your daughter's doing great, but she's just, sometimes she floats off, or she's in another world, or but they do not say, you might want to get that checked out, or something. It sounds something similar to, I don't know, I don't even know what a teacher can say these days, but whatever it is, they don't how do you say this, they don't put them in the path of, you need to get this checked out, bottom line, right? And how do you have to pay attention. First of all, you got to be educated. Every teacher is not really educated. I think that mental health should be like a part of the teacher's curriculum, like, period. How do you recognize different things in children? How do you make sure that the child isn't missed? How do you make sure that they're getting the support that they need? What could you do differently in your class so that, if you have a neurodivergent kid and he or she is not diagnosed, but they're still getting the education and getting the support that they need, how do you go about doing that? But I still think, like I said, mental health should be a part of the curriculum. And because that's one way. The other way is, I mean, teachers can, just like I do, you can go out and study it, right? I mean, you can go out and research it and just really understand, especially if you see it happening in one of your children, right, in the classroom. You can take the steps to research it just like anybody else can. You can look for classes that are specifically geared towards you. So like a lady that I talked to in the UK, she has a program, for example, where she teaches teachers about learning differences. That is her thing, right? So I'm sure there's probably programs around here too. So there's just a lot of things that they can do. The other thing is being open. So obviously teachers are human, right? And so there are some people who are going to be completely on board. There's some people who are going to just not understand it very well, but want to do great, want to do things for your child. They just don't know how to do it. And then there's people who are just people who just don't think ADHD is real. So you have to also be open. And I mean, I've heard some horror stories from parents I mean, my heart just broke when the stories that I hear that their children go through with the teachers because they don't believe ADHD is real, or they don't believe that specific child could have ADHD. So yeah, so the bottom line is, for girls, they really need to be able to watch what's going on with them. They need to understand the symptoms that they specifically overall are going to have, because it's very rare. Well, it's not very rare. It's a very small percentage that they're going to be diagnosed with a combined or hyperactivity, right? It's usually the inattentive. So you got to understand what that means. What does inattentive mean? So you can recognize it in that little girl, because you don't want them to be stressed and be behind, especially in today's society, because the pressure that is on the school children today is unbelievably insane. I mean, the workload that my kids have to do, it's just insane. And the stress. I mean, I watched this video, this movie, it was a documentary about homework. And I can't remember what the documentary was called, but these kids, like high schoolers, were getting sick like adults, right? They were losing their hair. They were getting like literally they would get sick, like whether they're losing weight or whether they're catching colds all the time, whatever it was, these children were getting sick. So being able to catch a lot of those things earlier in life, so then you can help them develop strategies to help them later on in life, that's going to be that's going to be huge. That's going to be huge. Yeah. Yeah.
I've never really thought about it. Like when you're like saying your answer, I kind of thought about it. I was like, is it because like teachers are scared to tell the parents like, oh, your kid might have something, because it's like the parents would feel like really angry about that and like might remove their kids. And then there's also that part of me that's like, there's also like teachers who are like specifically trained to deal with kids who have like neurodivergencies, and it's like regular teachers don't go through that. So it's like when they do come across a kid that has it, they're like, what am I supposed to do? And they have to like call for help, and it's like a whole spectacle. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that.
Yeah, because every time I talk to a teacher, they're like, no, we can't just, because you can't just say, you know, I think your child has X, right? You just,
Yeah.
I mean, it just wouldn't be appropriate. But you know that they need something. So how do you approach that? You know what? That's a good interview. How do you talk to parents about their child when you can't say it directly? So
Yeah. Like you like put it in like a cake, like you secretly put the message in, you're like, your kid might have something. Just
right, really? What? So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this interview.
Absolutely.
It was such an honor. Like I was like such a fan. I was like, oh my God, she's like messaging me. This is so exciting.
Well, I appreciate this. This was fun, Annie. So
I hope you have a good day.
thank you. Take care, Annie.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.